Well, good morning. Welcome to Wake Up in the Word. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be looking at a difficult psalm, a very difficult one from a reading standpoint. It's Psalm 74. It asks a tough question. God, why have you forsaken us forever? Who would ask such a question? Let's check it out and find out today on Wake Up in the Word. There are a lot of implications to this psalm and possibilities that go along with it that I'll share after we read it. It's the second psalm of Asaph in this 73 to 83 section. And being a psalm of his, you would think, my goodness, this is written at a time prior to the building of the temple of God, or maybe during Solomon's reign as it's being built or has just been built. But some of the references here are to the destruction of the temple, making some people say that this is a psalm that was written much later, perhaps during the destruction of the first temple by the rulers of Babylon, who came in and invaded and took the Jews off into captivity. So you'll see why it refers to that later, why some would say this is a much older psalm and was put in the hymn book of Israel later. Others would say, no, Asaph wrote it, but it's prophetic. Well, I don't know the answer to that, and there are a lot of different opinions, quite a few as you read and research this. But let's just read it together and feel what this psalm is all about. Watch for the three distinct parts of it as we begin in Psalm 74. Why have you rejected us forever, O God? Why does your anger smolder against the sheep of your pasture? Remember the people you purchased of old, the tribe of your inheritance, whom you redeemed, Mount Zion, where you dwelt. Turn your steps toward these everlasting ruins. All this destruction the enemy has brought on the sanctuary. Your foes roared at the place where you met with us. They set up their standards as signs. They behaved like men wielding axes to cut through a thicket of trees. They smashed all the carved paneling with their axes and hatchets. They burned your sanctuary to the ground. They defiled the dwelling place of your name. They said in their hearts, we will crush them completely. They burned every place where God was worshipped in the land. We are given no miraculous signs, no prophets are left, and none of us knows how long this will be. How long will the enemy mock you, O God? Will the foe revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the folds of your garment and destroy them. Now watch as it shifts to section 2. With all this despair, all this destruction that apparently has been witnessed, verse 12 reflects on who God really is. But you, O God, are my king from old. You bring salvation upon the earth. It was you who split open the sea by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave him as food to the creatures of the desert. It was you who opened up springs and streams. You dried up the ever-flowing rivers. The day is yours, and yours also the night. You established the sun and moon. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. You made both summer and winter. Now it stops to go to the third section of the psalm. Notice, first section, despair. The enemies have destroyed us, and God, you're nowhere. There are no prophets. There's no help. Nothing has happened. The sanctuary of the Lord has been destroyed. But then, God, this is who you are. We know you are the Lord who created us and created the earth. And you are all powerful. This is who you are. So now it closes with a prayer to this God, this prayer to Elohim. Verse 18. Remember how the enemy has mocked you, O Lord, how foolish people have reviled your name. Do not hand over the life of your dove to wild beasts. Do not forget the lives of your afflicted people forever. Have regard for your covenant, because haunts of violence fill the dark places of the land. Do not let the oppressed retreat in disgrace. May the poor and needy praise your name. Rise up, O God, and defend your cause. Remember how fools mock you all day long. Do not ignore the clamor of your adversaries, the uproar of your enemies, which rises continually. A cursory reading of this psalm would give you the impression that it is talking about the destruction of God's temple and how the land apparently has been abandoned from God's protection because of the destruction an enemy has brought to it. So yes, this psalm could be either in reference to being written about the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, or it could have been prophetic, pointing toward many such occurrences in history. For example, as you look down through history, there is a second destruction of a temple, and that occurred in AD 70 when the Romans came in and similarly destroyed the land. And the same cry might have gone out even then to say, Lord, where are you? What is happening? And then it could even move forward in history to look at the long period of diaspora where the land of Israel was left in ruins, conquered by foreign powers, became a desert in which almost no one dwelt, and was abandoned apparently by the God of the Israelite people. And so was it abandoned, or was this a time of fulfillment? And then some, like the late J.R. Church, even reference this to the time of the regathering of the nation of Israel. He likens Psalm 74 to 1974, a time of great distress in the land of Israel. As you remember, there had been great celebration in 1967 after the Six-Day War when Jerusalem was once again occupied by the Jewish people. But in 1973, there came that surprise attack in the Yom Kippur War, in which most Israelis were celebrating the holiday, weren't expecting it, and war breaks out. History tells us that it went something like this. Shortly before 2 o'clock on October the 6th, 1973, which would have already gone into the Jewish year 5734. 222 Egyptian jets roared into Israeli-held territory in the Suez region. 2,000 guns blazed. Hundreds of tanks, thousands of foot soldiers moved toward Israel. The Egyptian front was some 110 miles in length. And this is an area being manned by only 436 Israeli soldiers who had 3 tanks at their disposal. Sounded like a disaster. That was the southern front. On the northern front, simultaneously, Syrian fighter planes flew over the Golan Heights while their tanks rumbled southward toward Galilee. They had no idea what was taking place. It hit them as a complete surprise attack. The Syrians were armed with surface-to-air missiles that had been supplied by the Soviet Union that were now designed to shoot down Israeli fighter jets. However, the missiles had been programmed to intercept the plane similar to the way a quarterback leads his receiver in a football game, and within hours Israeli pilots had learned to outmaneuver them. But still, it was a devastating war, one in which their backs were up against the wall, and history tells us later that they were so concerned that they were about to be overrun that Israeli leaders hastily assembled several nuclear bombs and were ready, if it looked like they were going to be destroyed, to fly those over Arab capitals. But yet God was not ready for the end. He wasn't ready for World War III or nuclear holocaust. And somehow, especially by the help of the United States and some others, the Yom Kippur War was stopped, was halted. But 1974, as we're looking at Psalm 74, 1974 was a terrible time in Israel. Golda Meir, the famous prime minister of Israel, was accused of having neglected her duty, and she helped cause this, having caused the death of Israeli citizens and soldiers, and ended up resigning. A new prime minister comes on board. It was just a time of despair in Israel, heightened by the fact that one particular group of Jewish seers and rabbis believed that 1974 was the year of the coming of Messiah. And of course, Messiah didn't come. Devastation came instead. And there was a feeling of heartbreak that mirrors this psalm going on in Israel. Now, what do all these things have in common? If you look back through history, you remember this psalm began by asking why. Why, O Lord, would you forsake your nation, your people, and your land? Well, number one, because perhaps we've caused it ourselves. If you remember, the first captivity going off into Babylon was because the nation had followed after idols. They had followed idolatry. They had involved themselves in many wicked practices, sinful practices, and ignored the word of the Lord and the commandments of the Lord, and they caused it themselves. The captivity was actually a time of chastisement or discipline for the nation of Israel to try to bring them back. And to some degree it worked. As the people of the book, the people of the Old Testament covenant Jews returned to Jerusalem, they were a new people and they were stronger in their faith. Never again did they fall into idolatry. But then again, we have the first century. Jesus, the Messiah, has come, and many Jews embraced him, understanding who he was, and the church was born, and the gospel was spread. But many there rejected. And just as Jesus had predicted in AD 70, not one stone is going to be left on another, that all of this magnificent temple is going to be torn down. And once again, it was, because of the rejection of the Jewish people of their Messiah. And thus, a new diaspora, a new captivity went into effect, and the Jews were spread. The nation of Israel did not exist again for centuries until once again they were regathered as a part of end times prophecy right after World War II, when the nation of Israel has been reestablished. So my question is, when you see this kind of death and destruction and you're asking God why, the thing to do is look back in upon yourself and say, Lord, did we cause this? Is it something that we have missed? Is it sin in our own life? And it comes right back to every believer in the same way. Now, when you ask that question, the answer is not always the same. You may be in a position where you're saying, oh wow, what has just happened to me? And look at the death and destruction maybe coming in my own personal life or our nation or something else. And you can identify, here's where we went wrong, here's where we did something, and we have caused the destruction. But there are other times when you can't identify that, and you must just say, Lord, I just throw myself on you and your character to answer. I may never know the why, but I do know this. You are, as we see in the second part of this psalm, you are the great God of all history. You are the God who created us and set up this scenario. We're going to trust in you. And then finally, the prayer. You know, it's a four-part prayer. Did you notice that? First, he said, beginning in verse 18, remember your people. Do not hand the life of your dove to wild beasts. Do not forget the lives of your afflicted people. Secondly, he prayed, remember your promise. He called on God to remember his covenant in verse 20. Have regard for your covenant, because God will, he promises, do just that. He may not be doing it in the time we want him to, but he will honor his covenant. He will honor his promises. And then rekindle your praise. Rekindle your praise. Verse 21, do not let the oppressed retreat in disgrace, but may the poor and needy praise your name. Ultimately, Lord, don't you want to be praised? Yes, that's what it's all about. So Lord, take care of your people. Restore, send revival, come back and restore the very people that you have promised this land unto. Open their eyes, open their ears, open their hearts so that they can be blessed by you and will praise your name. And then finally, reveal your power. Rise up, O God, and defend your cause. And so it's a great prayer. Lord, remember your people, remember your promise, rekindle your praise, and reveal your power. And truly, when the people of God who are right with him, who've confessed their sins and have a clear conscience before God, pray that kind of prayer, I can tell you that God will answer. All the questions may not be evident right now. The questions may be evident, the answers are not. The answers to those questions may not come for some time. But I can tell you this, you can put your trust and your faith in this God who is our King from old, who has created all that we see, and who will stand by his people when they are faithful to him. All right, God bless you. It's a tough psalm to read today, and a tough one as we look at some of the things going on even in the Lord's land today, in the land of Israel. rockets being fired into Israel. Even the prime minister 2 days ago had to hide from terrorist rockets. Oh, listen, friends, these are heady days. Answers soon to come. God bless you. Let's do this again tomorrow on Wake Up in the Word.